In The Godfather, there's a scene in the garden. Vito Corleone, the man who built an empire from nothing, sits with his son Michael. He's weaker now, barely recovered from the assassination attempt. The war has taken everything from him. His eldest son, his strength, his time. But his mind? Still sharp as ever. And he lays it all out for Michael. Who the real enemy is, how the traitor will reveal himself, exactly how the attack will come. Michael just listens, amazed, almost in disbelief, because Vito just laid out something that should be impossible to predict. A plan so intricate, so precise, yet somehow it makes perfect sense. And then, just like Vito predicted, every single move happens exactly as he said it would. Tessio approaches with the meeting, the trap reveals itself. The pieces fall into place. Now, most people watch that scene and think, wow, Vito's smart. But it's deeper than that. Vito Corleone understood something that conquerors, emperors, and strategists have known about for thousands of years. He tapped into the resource that served the people who shaped the world they live in. He realized there was a playbook, one that allows you to play the game on easy mode, a blueprint that's been used and solidified for over 2,000 years, buried within the ancient wisdom of a Chinese military general, Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Now everyone's heard that name, but few have actually explored it, and even fewer have unlocked what it really means. Because this isn't just theory. It's not philosophy just sitting on a shelf. It's the operating system for power itself, and it's all playing out in The Godfather. See, The Godfather isn't just a crime saga, it's a blueprint. Every move Vito makes, every calculated decision Michael executes, the way they navigate betrayal, war, and power, it's all there, the ancient strategies of warfare playing out in the shadows of the underworld. And the people who actually hold power, they know this. They don't just read it like a textbook. They understand that they have to treat it like a gold mine, where it's necessary to dig deeper and extrapolate the true meaning behind the wisdom. Look, there's no other film in history that holds so many layers. Over 50 years later, we're still uncovering gems buried within it. So today, we're breaking it down. We'll explore 7 principles from the art of war, with 7 moments where the Corleones either mastered them perfectly or paid the ultimate price for ignoring them, giving you practical lessons and tools for you to conquer your life and reach your true potential. I have to warn you, if you master this, your life will not be the same. You'll start living life on easy mode. Your competition will stand no chance. This is how the game is really played. Let's begin. If you want to put your knowledge to the test, I've created a strategy quiz that will reveal your strengths, weaknesses, and the type of strategist you are. Think of it as a battlefield assessment before stepping into the war zone. You can access it here. Now, let's dive into the book that has shaped emperors, warlords, and CEOs alike. Hey, and by the way, do me a favor. Take a look at the like and subscribe button. Don't be a gavone. Hit them once and comment inner circle. Come on, let's get this to 10,000 likes. Loyalty like that don't go unnoticed. Come on,
Thank you.
before I gotta start. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. The year is 1955. Vito pulled together all the strength left to fix the mess he found his empire in. He saw the vultures circling, waiting for his absence to strike. But the Godfather manages to buy some more time. A few weeks later, Michael has safely returned, stepping into the shadows of his father's reign. But war was about to begin, not from the outside, but within. Growing stronger, and the men around him are restless, the old ways are clashing with the new, and even those closest to him are beginning to question his leadership. Not only are their enemies growing bolder, but strife within their own ranks is dangerously close to a boiling point. The men who once served his father without question now whisper behind closed doors and later confront Michael. One of Vito's greatest strengths, one that many masters of strategy throughout history have used, is his ability to see things as they are, not as he wishes them to be. He didn't sugarcoat reality. He grasped the brutal truths of the game of power and acted accordingly. And so he could see how outsiders, even his own closest allies, viewed his heir, given the family's current state, there was no doubt, once he was gone, their enemies would look to deliver the final killing blow. He knew this peace deal only bought him time. It was never gonna hold. The vultures were slowly closing in. It was obvious that he was a pillar holding this crumbling dynasty together, and once he was gone... And so, after Michael returns from Vegas, dealing with all the drama there, Vito very casually lays it all out for him. And sure enough, he predicted every step of the way. But how did he know? Vito Corleone knew the traitor would reveal himself because he understood power, betrayal, and human nature on a profound level. His prediction wasn't based on some supernatural instinct, but on logic, experience, and observation. But let's get into it a bit deeper. Interpretation. 1. Understanding power moves. Following the meeting of the bosses, Vito had realized that it was Barzini, not Tattaglia, who was the true mastermind behind the attacks on the Corleone family all along. We have a detailed breakdown of the meeting, and make sure to watch that after this. But since it was Barzini all along, it changed everything. He now understood the caliber of his true enemy, and so knew how to act accordingly. Why? Well, he now understood who his enemy was, and realized their desires and motivations, and so can now use it against them, predicting their moves and lying out traps. But he also knew the moves that would be used against. After all, if you've seen our olive oil, since it was Barzini who was behind this from the beginning, it also means he was the one who got Paulie to flip, another clue to Barzini's strategic style. See how it's all coming together? Barzini, as the real power behind the Tattaglias, understood that as long as Michael lived, the Corleones could rise again. Eliminating Sonny had weakened them, but Michael was a wild card. He needed to take care of this meddling kid and get this over with. Killing him outright in the open would be too risky and could spark a war, but getting him to a meeting, that would allow Barzini to control the circumstances and eliminate him cleanly. 2. The nature of betrayal. Now, a betrayal of this scale could only come from someone with access, influence, and the trust of the family. That narrowed it down to someone high-ranking, one of the capos. Vito also knew that a traitor, even if loyal in the past, would always try to justify their actions by presenting it as just business or for the good of the family. The traitor would approach Michael with what seemed like a reasonable request, a meeting with Barzini, because that would serve both Barzini's interests, to eliminate Michael, and the traitor's own, to align with the new power. Vito had seen it before. He had lived through betrayals and knew how power worked. He also knew that Barzini wouldn't risk an outright war, not when Michael could simply be tricked into coming to a peace talk and taken out cleanly. And given that it was time to abandon ship, all Barzini needed was to wait for a candidate to finish off what he had started all those years ago. Vito had been a symbol of stability in the Mafia world. His death created a power vacuum, and everyone expected Michael to either fall in line or be removed. If Michael rejected all meetings, he would look weak or unreasonable. Barzini would spread rumors that he was unwilling to negotiate, which would isolate him further. A meeting was the only way Barzini could get close enough to kill him. The Corleones were too cautious to let Michael be attacked in public. 3. Setting a trap. Instead of hunting down the traitor, Vito let the traitor expose himself. He told Michael he created a passive test. He didn't need to accuse anyone, act paranoid, or make a mistake by punishing the wrong man. The guilty party would eventually step forward on their own, believing they were being strategic. 4. Tessio falls for it. And so, with Vito barely in the ground, his family barely having any time to mourn the loss of the enigmatic Godfather, the traitor reveals himself. It would be Tessio who approaches Michael to arrange the Barzini meeting, and it confirmed everything. Tessio wasn't acting out of personal hatred. He saw Barzini as the inevitable winner and wanted to switch sides before it was too late. It's only business. In the first meeting with Michael in charge, Tessio did use Law 3 of the 48 Laws of Power to perfection. He let Clemenza do most of the talking, telling Michael and the Don what he really thought, yet not coming across as too distressed. Have a look.
Forgive me, Godfather, but with you gone, me and Pete will come under Barzini's thumb sooner or later.
And I hate that goddamn Barzini.
In 6 months' time, there won't be nothing left to build on.
And the cherry on top was that final little handshake before he left, while Clemenza had already stormed off. A revolt felt quite imminent, but it was not quite obvious who it would be. But what was in it for Tessio? What was the deal Barzini made that Tessio simply could not refuse? Well, here's where it gets even more dramatic. A lot of people question whether Barzini was the one who had approached Tessio, similar to how he did with Paulie or even Carlo. Although we don't know for certain who approached who, it wouldn't be very likely that a man as cunning as Barzini would risk approaching someone as high-ranking as Tessio, therefore risking exposing his plot. That's unless he had some concrete evidence to suggest that Tessio was truly set on betraying the Corleone family. Especially that Don Vito tried to fool Sollozzo and Bruno Tattaglia in a similar way with Luca Brasi. And even if we look at his body language at the funeral, the surprise on Barzini's face is quite evident. And if we then have a look at Tessio's body language and tone of voice, it would seem highly likely that Tessio himself went directly to Barzini, who was already stealing most of his territory. So what was in it for Tessio? Well, the remains of the Corleone Empire would have been enough for really anyone, especially if the alternative is collapsing with an already dying empire. On paper, it was the smart move, the most Machiavellian, and could even be supported by the principles of the art of war. However, Tessio broke multiple laws of power and made a deadly miscalculation. By making the move, he sealed his fate. But even if he had succeeded, it wouldn't have ended as Tessio hoped. You see, what Tessio didn't know was that after Barzini took care of Michael and all the other Corleone loyalists, he would be next. Think about it. If a man is willing to betray the family he helped build, is he someone you can guarantee won't do the same or probably worse to you? Can he be more loyal to you in the long run, even though you were once sworn enemies? Of course not. So once he had used Tessio as a pawn, he would crush him once and for all. But Tessio was oblivious to this fact, or maybe he had his own plans. Conclusion. Vito Corleone didn't have a mystical foresight. He had wisdom, patience, and an understanding of human nature. He knew that Barzini would employ an effective trap, and so needed a traitor to lure Michael in. The traitor would be someone high up in the family with real influence to set up a meeting, but someone with enough gall and ambition to follow through. By waiting for the traitor to reveal himself, Vito ensured that Michael wouldn't act blindly, but with absolute certainty. That's the mark of a true strategist. But this all begs the question, why was it obvious that it would be done at a meeting? It's actually a lot more interesting than I thought. Listen to this. The Mafia has long used meetings as a setup for betrayals and assassinations. Vito Corleone himself had survived countless assassination attempts. Michael, having studied his father's ways, knew that meetings were the perfect setting for a hit. Now, we don't know exactly how the assassination was going to take place. All we know is that it was going to be Tessio's territory. Now, this could mean on the way there, or even be a red wedding style during the meeting. But, by the way, we see Tessio react when he's told that Michael is not going to be in the car with them, rather in a separate car, and that he should go ahead. He definitely had something quite elaborate up his sleeve. Problem is, we'll never know, as Michael was ready for him. And if we look at how the olive oil wars ended, well, it's clearly a tried and true strategy. But why? Let's look at why it's so effective. Meetings disarm the target. If Michael agreed to a meeting, he would come in peacefully, without an army of bodyguards, making him vulnerable. Meetings create an illusion of safety. They're often framed as negotiations, truces, or peace talks. It allows the enemy to lure their target into a false sense of security. The most famous Mafia hits happen this way. Maranzano, Masseria, and even real-life mob figures like Paul Castellano were all taken out at what were supposed to be business meetings. It's the same idea as the Red Wedding, a promise of peace, an invitation to talk, and then when the target's at ease, the knife comes out. The illusion of diplomacy makes the betrayal all the more devastating. It's why the tactic has endured for centuries. From the battlefields of ancient Rome to the back rooms of the Mafia, the meeting isn't just a formality. It's the perfect stage for a coup de grace, where power shifts in an instant and the victim never sees it coming until it's too late. They probably wouldn't have tried it on Vito, but since Michael was seen as a complete amateur and completely underestimated, they thought they could pull this off with ease. Frankie Pentangelli sat alone in the dimly lit room, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a tombstone. He had barely survived the Rosato brothers' ambush, crawling out of that bloody mess with nothing but his life and a bitter realization. Someone wanted him dead. And the whispers, the subtle nudges from Roth's men had all pointed in one direction: Michael Corleone. The same Michael who was supposed to be his boss, his ally. The FBI had wasted no time. They made him an offer, a deal to flip, to testify before the Senate committee and put Michael Corleone away for good. All he had to do was open his mouth, tell them what he knew, and the Corleone dynasty would crumble. It was almost poetic. One signature, one statement, and the empire Michael had spent years building would be reduced to dust. It all went back to Hyman Roth. Frankie had seen it coming from miles away, smelled the rot beneath all the promises. He had told Michael, warned him, that Roth was not to be trusted, that his deal in Havana was a trap dressed up as an opportunity. But Michael insisted he saw the future, the long game, the empire beyond crime. Frankie saw something else, a betrayal waiting to happen. And when Michael ignored him, pushed ahead, left him out of the equation, it didn't sit right. Frankie was old school. Loyalty meant something. Respect meant something. And Michael, he had been treating him like an afterthought. So when the Rosato brothers tried to take him out, when he barely made it out alive, it wasn't hard to believe the whispers that maybe, just maybe, Michael had set him up. With the Senate breathing down his neck and the FBI eager to make history, Frankie's testimony wouldn't just put Michael away. It would decimate the entire Corleone family. There would be no Michael Corleone, no underworld empire, no legacy. The Corleones would be finished, their power dismantled piece by piece. Michael wouldn't just go to prison, his entire lineage would be erased from history. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about ending an era. For Michael, this was the highest stakes game he had ever played. He was facing not just the law, but an enemy who knew everything about him, an enemy who just months ago had been his own. Pentangelli was either going to break the law of the government or the law of the Mafia. Frankie was locked down in an impenetrable fortress, an army base guarded around the clock by U.S. military personnel. There was no way in, no way out, no way to get close without triggering a national scandal. And even if Michael could reach him, even if he could whisper the right words in his ear, it wouldn't matter. Frankie had made up his mind. He was going to testify. Michael only had a short window before the hearing. He had to act fast. He had to ensure that Frankie Pentangelli either stayed silent or never made it to the stand. But most importantly, it had to seem like Michael Corleone had nothing to do with it. And then, the morning of the hearing, Frankie walked in, ready to speak. The cameras were rolling, the senators leaning in, waiting for the moment they could finally bury Michael Corleone. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Frankie saw something that made his breath catch. His brother, Don Vincenzo Pentangelli, straight from Sicily. He didn't say a word, he didn't have to. Frankie knew. One look, that was all it took. He sat down, looked at the senators, and suddenly, he didn't remember anything. The words he had rehearsed, the testimony he had prepared, it all vanished. He stammered, dodged questions, mumbled something about how the life people talked about in those stories didn't really exist. Michael never had to lift a finger. He had subdued his anger. You don't always have to think about direct action. There's a much higher level that not many realize exists, let alone openly talk about. Here's what Master Sun Tzu says. Ultimate excellence lies not in winning every battle, but in defeating the enemy without ever fighting. The highest form of warfare is to attack strategy itself. Most people assume war is about brute force. who has the biggest army, the sharpest swords, the strongest shoulders. But the truth is, war is about control, not just control over land or resources, but control over perception, alliances, and the enemy's will to fight. Julius Caesar understood this better than anyone. His conquest of Gaul wasn't about crushing his enemies with overwhelming power. Well, maybe it was, but while decimating the tribes, he also focused on manipulating them into a position where they had already lost before they even knew it. He attacked their unity, their trust, their ability to organize. This is the highest level of strategy, where war is fought before swords are ever drawn. 1. Seeing the battlefield before it exists. The moment Caesar crossed into Gaul, he didn't see one nation like they were often perceived. Rather than seeing them as faraway barbarians, he saw hundreds of factions, rivalries, and blood feuds. He saw resentments buried deep and warlords who despised each other more than they feared Rome. The Gauls had the numbers, the warriors, the home field advantage, but they had one fatal weakness: they were divided. So, Caesar didn't need to conquer all of Gaul at once, he just needed to keep all of them from uniting against him. Instead of thinking about where to attack, he thought about how to weaken them from within. He played their tribal leaders against each other, offering protection to some while fueling distrust in others. He spread rumors, planting seeds of paranoia that certain factions were conspiring with Rome. He offered alliances that seemed beneficial in the short term, but in reality made Gaul dependent on Rome for survival. Before long, the Gallic tribes were fighting each other more than they were fighting Caesar. The divide and conquer, or divide et impera strategy, has ancient roots and was not invented by a single individual. Instead, it's evolved over a common military and political tactic, appearing throughout history as a method to control larger, more powerful enemies by fragmenting them into smaller, weaker factions. Before Caesar, one of the earliest known practitioners of this strategy was Philip II of Macedon, the father of Alexander the Great. Philip used divide and conquer to subdue the Greek city-states, playing them against one another to prevent unity. Instead of engaging all of Greece in open warfare, he formed strategic alliances with some states while undermining others. By the time Greece realized what was happening, Philip had already secured control, a strategy Alexander would later refine in his conquests. The Romans, masters of long-term strategic thinking, adopted and perfected this principle. Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul is one of the most famous examples of this strategy in action. 2. Attacking the enemy's strategy, not just their armies. The easiest way to win a war is to never have to fight it at full strength. If you can weaken an enemy's alliances, break their confidence, or make them fight amongst themselves, you can defeat them without having to face them head-on. This is what separates armchair generals from conquerors. Most people go for the obvious move, the head-on attack, the brute force. But the mastermind doesn't attack the army, he attacks the strategy. This is why Caesar's campaign in Gaul was so devastating. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a manipulator of the war itself. By the time the final battle at Alesia was fought, the Gauls were already defeated in every way that mattered. Their strongest leaders had turned on each other, their trust was shattered, their unity was destroyed. All Caesar had to do was let them collapse, and then deliver the final blow. And Caesar wasn't unique in this, although he may be one of the first recorded examples to have used it so potently, he was far from the last. If you look at the most successful conquerors in history, you'll notice a pattern. They all understood that true dominance isn't just about brute force, but controlling the battlefield before the first strike is ever made. Even in mythology, during the Trojan War, we see the same principle at play: dividing your enemies, breaking them into smaller, more manageable factions, and ensuring they are too weak to resist. This has always been the key to victory. 3. The Master's Playbook: how you apply this today. You don't have to be a Roman general to use divide and conquer in life. This principle applies to business, power, negotiation, and any form of competition. The highest level of control is not fighting harder, it's making sure that the fight is never fair to begin with. If you control the alliances, the environment, and the battlefield before the conflict even starts, you've already won. In business, you don't compete by attacking rivals head-on. You influence the market, shift alliances, and control perception so they never see the real threat coming. In negotiation, you don't argue directly. You plant doubt, introduce alternatives, and create pressures that make your opponent collapse from within. In power struggles, you don't fight every battle. You turn enemies against each other, control the flow of information, and weaken their ability to resist you. But can we make it even more practical? You can divide and conquer your daily challenges by breaking big tasks into smaller, manageable parts and planning your projects like a military campaign, knowing when to advance, when to change course, and where to allocate your best resources. Staying adaptable, anticipating obstacles, and eliminating any inefficiencies before they slow you down. Victory isn't about doing everything at once, it's about strategic execution. The best moves are the ones nobody realizes you've made until it's too late. The battle isn't won in the moment, it's won long before the first strike is ever made. That is the true art of war. An offer you can't refuse. If we talk about subduing your enemy, you can't not talk about Don Vito Corleone, the master of this strategy. Vito was a master of psychological warfare. The easiest example would be the whole Jack Woltz situation. Poor Khartoum had to pay with his, well, head. Vito utilized his reputation that lingered in the minds of those whose fate had been intertwined with his, whether through loyalty, fear, or necessity. Every whisper of his name carried the weight of past decisions, silent favors, and unspoken debts. His name and precedent remained even if he wasn't physically present, an unshakable force that dictated the outcomes in rooms he never stepped into. His influence wasn't just built on power, but on quiet understanding that defiance came with consequences and loyalty was always rewarded, and so he was able to counter potential rivals without even lifting a finger. Imagine you're in a small rural village. You wake up from the terrifying sound. The Great Khan and the Mongol horde are here. Now that's a terrifying thought. Even though you haven't seen them by mere association, you immediately know what they stand for and what they specialize in doing. It's quite a dark extreme, but let's uncover why. Genghis Khan, the founder and first great Khan of the Mongol Empire, built a reputation shaped by both his military might and the brutality associated with his conquests. As a result, he then utilized another form of indirect warfare, psychological domination, a tactic masterfully used by Genghis Khan. Instead of engaging in prolonged sieges or costly battles, he weaponized fear itself. His reputation for merciless destruction preceded him, spreading terror across entire regions. Cities, knowing the fate of those who resisted, often surrendered without a fight, offering tribute rather than facing total annihilation. This allowed the Mongols to expand rapidly with minimal resistance, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the sword, it's the fear of its use. Hannibal's use of fake soldiers. But sometimes you might find yourself in the middle of a war. How do you subdue your enemy without fighting? Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general who had already humiliated the Romans at Trebia and Lake Trasimene, now found himself cornered. The Roman dictator Fabius Maximus, known as the Cunctator, the Delayer, had trapped Hannibal in the valley of Ager Falernus, cutting off all exits. The Romans believed they had finally contained their elusive foe. But Hannibal was never one to fight on his enemy's terms. Instead of attempting a desperate breakout, he did something unexpected. He turned emptiness into a weapon. As night fell, Hannibal ordered his men to gather thousands of oxen and tie bundles of brushwood to their horns. Then, with precise timing, they set the brushwood ablaze and drove the panicked animals up the mountain passes. The effect was instant chaos. To the Roman sentries, it appeared as if an entire Carthaginian army was ascending the mountains in retreat. Fabius's soldiers, convinced that Hannibal was making a desperate escape, rushed to intercept the fleeing enemy, abandoning their posts and guarding the valley's real exit. Meanwhile, the true Carthaginian army slipped through the now unguarded pass, unchallenged and intact. By dawn, Hannibal had vanished. The Romans were left baffled and humiliated, having been tricked into chasing fire and shadows. Interpretation and application. Hannibal's escape at Ager Falernus is a masterclass in using deception to deny an enemy a target. Rather than smashing through the Roman blockade, he let their own assumptions guide them into failure. He understood that fear and uncertainty were just as powerful as swords and spears. In warfare, a strong enemy expects confrontation. The key is to frustrate them by offering nothing solid to attack while creating the illusion of vulnerability. In business and politics, if rivals are watching you closely, misdirection can be a powerful tool. Make them react to false moves while you execute your real strategy elsewhere. In life, when others expect aggression, sometimes the best move is to be elusive, unpredictable, and indirect. Hannibal didn't just escape that night, he showed yet again that victory is not about brute force, but about controlling perception. The Romans had trapped themselves, not him. Principle breakdown. The essence of the art of war by Sun Tzu is winning without fighting. The greatest victory is the one that requires no battle. True power comes from intimidation, psychological manipulation, and positioning, not brute force. The most skilled leader makes his enemies submit before a war even begins. This is the essence of the art of war, to win by strategy, not by bloodshed. Michael Corleone did not defeat his enemies by outgunning them, he outthought them. He made them believe that they were in control, then flipped the game when it was too late for them to react. He kept his emotions hidden, spoke softly, and let fear do the work. When he finally made his move, it was swift and absolute, though at the right time to achieve what others take decades to do. But power isn't just about crushing enemies, it's also about turning them into allies. If you can make an opponent come to your side willingly, you win twice. The enemy is neutralized and your strength increases. Vito Corleone mastered this. He didn't rule with fear alone. He made people feel they owed him. He gave favors, knowing one day they would be repaid. Even further, he made them happy and excited to repay him. But those who resisted were, let's just say they were incentivized to change their minds. Power is the art of control. Win through influence, not force. Let others fight while you decide the outcome. Sun Tzu teaches that war is not just about combat, it's about mind games, influence, and manipulation. The best victories come from making the enemy believe resistance is futile or unnecessary. This can be done by causing confusion, creating fear, offering an illusion of security, or turning rivals into allies. The key is positioning yourself so that conflict never becomes necessary. See the problem before it arises. Cut off threats before they take shape. If an enemy can't fight, he's already lost. The best way to defeat a rival is to make him believe that he's already been beaten. At its core, the art of war is about control of your opponent, your environment, and most importantly, yourself. A reckless leader fights blindly. A wise leader moves with patience, choosing the perfect moment to strike or making it unnecessary to strike at all. So there's why Sun Tzu says, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. In The Godfather, after Sonny was taken out, we see Don Vito needing to step in, while he still had not fully recovered, in order to prevent his empire from collapsing. He calls a meeting with the heads of the 5 families who rule over New York. At this meeting, Vito goes in to make peace with the other families in order to safely bring back his son Michael from his exile in Sicily. But Vito's goals and intentions behind the meeting were not limited to the reasons he gave the other Dons. Vito needed to verify who was behind these lethal attacks on his family. Vito began the meeting by laying out his cards. He states that he is willing to go back to the way things were before, especially since the war cost both men their sons' lives. The thing that lingered in the other Dons' minds is the reasoning behind calling such a meeting. Vito had just lost his eldest son, his heir to the empire, and his response? A peace summit? What was his play? Could this actually have been submission of the Godfather himself? Well, they were about to find out. Wanting to continue his grand strategy, Vito reiterates his willingness to concede on this deal, if it meant peace, which is a big deal. Tattaglia, maybe in a short instance of actual intelligence, calls out Vito's claims of peace directly. Of course, up until now, it's all well and good to say you want peace and want everything to go back to the way they were before, but what guarantees he won't change his mind later? He wasn't accusing Vito of lying, but bringing up the fact that Vito may have accepted his fate for now. But what if he suddenly feels the urge for revenge? But here, Vito seals the deal. He lays it out for them. Of course, Vito was a reasonable man and a man of honor, but his eldest son was just murdered, so suddenly becoming a pacifist doesn't make much sense. He unveils that his true reasoning behind wanting peace was to bring back his exiled son who had just survived an assassination attempt. Here, Tattaglia is genuinely sold. The fact that the Godfather himself gave his word, swore on the lives of those dearest to him. And Vito wasn't lying, he genuinely meant every word. More on that later, and so this was felt by Tattaglia. But guess who seemed the most skeptical? Of course, Don Barzini. It's quite amusing how in the beginning, Barzini was the light-hearted one, trying to act very level-headed, but by the end, his eyes were like daggers. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. It was almost too good to be true. Could this actually be the end of the unbreakable Godfather? Did this event really crush Vito that low? Was his reign as the boss of bosses actually over? Well, it would seem so. But as long as Vito was alive, the Corleone family needed to remain alive. What's clear is that coming out of this meeting, there's a new boss of bosses. And so, Vito got the peace he wanted. He was to fight another day. But was he just delaying the inevitable? What was Vito really thinking? For a decade, Napoleon Bonaparte had been the master of Europe. His armies had crushed Austria, Prussia, and Spain, toppling monarchs and redrawing borders at will. And now, in 1812, Russia was next. Napoleon believed he was marching to another swift conquest. His strategy had always been the same: draw the enemy into a battle, destroy them, and dictate the terms of peace. But what if the enemy refused to fight? The Russians, whether by design or disorganization, did exactly that. Tsar Alexander I and his generals didn't have a unified strategy from the outset. Some commanders wanted a decisive engagement, others urged caution. But as Napoleon's Grand Army advanced deeper into Russia, a pattern emerged. The Russians kept retreating. They burned their own villages, destroyed their crops, and abandoned their cities, not necessarily because it was all part of a grand plan, but because they had no better option. Yet, whether intentional or not, this strategy would be the reason they won. The Russian strategy: let the land fight the war. Instead of confronting Napoleon head-on, the Russians withdrew. Every step the Grand Army took deeper into Russian territory, the land itself turned against them. The French, accustomed to living off the land, found only empty villages and scorched fields. By September, Napoleon reached Moscow. Moscow had burned itself to the ground rather than be captured. At this moment, Napoleon still believed he could dictate the outcome. He waited in Moscow, expecting Tsar Alexander to negotiate peace. But no envoy came. Weeks passed, then the first frost set in. The retreat was inevitable. Now, as Napoleon's men turned back, then the Russian army appeared, not in open battle, but as shadows striking at supply lines, ambushing stragglers, picking off the starving, frostbitten men. Napoleon had invaded Russia with 600,000 soldiers. By the time they staggered back across the border, only 60,000 remained. Napoleon had tried to conquer Russia, but Russia itself had conquered him. Interpretation and application. The Russian strategy was not entirely intentional, but it worked. Some Russian commanders had argued for standing and fighting, but logistics, uncertainty, and the sheer scale of Napoleon's invasion forced them into a war of retreat and attrition. It was not a perfectly executed strategy from the start, but as Napoleon advanced, it became clear letting him overextend was the best way to defeat him. Sun Tzu's wisdom proved prophetic. He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. In warfare, even an improvised strategy can work if it forces the enemy to fight against their own limitations. In business and negotiation, if a competitor is aggressive, don't meet them head-on. Let them stretch themselves too thin, and they will collapse under their own weight. In life, sometimes survival is the ultimate victory. When faced with overwhelming force, patience and endurance can outlast raw power. Napoleon had come to Russia expecting one great battle. The Russians, whether by choice or necessity, gave him none, and in the end, nothing is what he left with. Not all retreats are strategic. Had the Russians retreated too soon or too often, they could have lost control of their own army, faced internal rebellion, or allowed Napoleon to dictate terms. The key was knowing when to delay and when to strike, ensuring that Napoleon's army was broken before engaging directly. The French had been stronger, faster, more disciplined, but in the end, they never had a chance. Because the Russians, whether by intent or accident, understood the real game. This was never about Moscow, never about land. It was about time. Napoleon could defeat armies, but he could not defeat winter, starvation, and exhaustion. He thought he was fighting a war. Instead, he was walking into a graveyard.
Thus, we may know that there are 5 essentials for victory. He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. He will win who knows how to handle both superior and inferior forces. He will win whose army is animated by the same spirit throughout all its ranks. He will win who, prepared himself, waits to take the enemy unprepared. He will win who has military capacity and is not interfered with by the sovereign. Victory lies in the knowledge of these 5 points, hence the saying, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle.
Vito knew his position on the chessboard. Continuing this war would be suicide. If he continued this war, the best he could hope for is a Pyrrhic victory. He might win on paper, but the cost would be his sons. So fighting for the sake of it, or to satisfy his urge for revenge, would be futile. He knew the wisest move would be to regroup. It would mean that they would be seen as weak, altering that carefully and painfully cultivated image and reputation he worked so hard to build up. Also, how could Vito fight if he didn't know who he was fighting exactly? Yes, it was Tattaglia, but Tattaglia didn't have the guts, ambition, or even the brains to pull off something like this. Something wasn't adding up. The easiest way to look at this is to ask who benefited the most from this. Well, Tattaglia and Barzini were going to make a ton of money, but that's nothing new. What really changes is the shift of the power dynamics. Barzini was the second most powerful don in the country. Taking out Vito means he would be the capo di tutti capi. To keep all this as simple as possible, here's what Barzini was thinking. Barzini knew he couldn't take on Vito on his own, but if most of the other families were on his side, well, then he had a pretty good shot. Pretty simple, isn't it? Well, not quite. Here's why. How do you dethrone the Godfather himself? He was known to be a fair and reasonable man with great relations with all. But even putting all that to the side, like what Frankie said, the Corleone family was like the Roman Empire. So he needed to wait. Wait until he saw an opening, a chink in Vito's seemingly impenetrable armor. It took years, but once he saw the slightest hint of weakness in the Don, he pounced. Yet even when essentially conceding defeat, Vito played the long game. He may have lost the battle, but he did not lose the war. Vito was setting up his pieces for one last play, a final move that would. But he could only help with the setup. It would be up to his new heir to see it through. And so, Vito made the wise, logical choice. It must have been extremely hard for him to have to allow. Every second they were alive must have been like a dagger into his heart. Yet he knew if he was to win, he would need to play the long game. The war was not over.
This program is brought to you by Don Cortado. Power doesn't shout. It arrives precisely when it means to. Meet Power Brew, a balanced medium roast with rich coffee flavor, elevated by a subtle, earthy finish. Inside, a disciplined trio does its work. Lion's mane to sharpen focus, and chaga, rich in natural antioxidants for quiet resilience, and a smooth, grounded finish. A unique, satisfying cup that supports steady energy and wellness. No jitters, no crash. For the plan, for the pressure, for the long game. Keep your edge. Don Cortado, Power Brew. Make your move. For a limited time, all Culture Mafia members will receive an extra 10% off, as well as free express shipping. But hurry, this is a very limited run. And now let's get back to the film. Ciao.
Won't see you coming, ensuring that, in the end, the schemers face consequences for their designs. If Vito had just declared war and with sheer brute force tried to expose Barzini, he would have guaranteed the annihilation of his empire. But since he played along with Barzini, giving him the illusion that he was in control, not in a million years could he have seen what was coming. Victory is not always about attacking. It's about knowing when to fight and when to wait. The best generals don't rush into battle blindly. They assess the situation, calculate risks, and only strike when the conditions favor them. This is what separates a reckless warrior from a master strategist. In The Godfather, after Sonny's death, Don Vito Corleone understood that his empire was on the brink of collapse. Instead of lashing out in revenge, he called a meeting with the 5 families. On the surface, he appeared to be seeking peace, willing to accept the new order. But in reality, this meeting was about gathering intelligence, identifying the true orchestrator behind the attacks on his family. The other Dons wondered, why was Vito suddenly offering peace? His eldest son had just been murdered. Shouldn't he be preparing for war? This hesitation worked in Vito's favor. His enemies began to second-guess themselves, unsure of his real intentions. In the end, Vito secured Michael's safe return from Sicily and ensured that the Corleone family could rebuild. This is the essence of the art of war. Never fight when the conditions are against you. The Russians used this strategy against Napoleon. Instead of engaging him in open battle, they let their land fight the war for them. They retreated deeper into Russia, burning everything behind them, forcing Napoleon's army to starve and freeze. By the time Napoleon realized he had been lured into a trap, it was too late. His once great army was broken, not by a decisive battle, but by attrition. A true strategist doesn't chase every fight. He chooses battles that he's sure to win. Sometimes the best move is to not fight at all, but to let the enemy exhaust themselves while you prepare for the final strike. Tessio had been with the Corleones for decades, a trusted capo. Heck, he helped build the empire. Some would say a true family member, a brother to Vito and an uncle to Michael. But when Michael took over and saw how he was going to run things, he figured it was time to abandon ship. He assumed Michael wasn't ready. And sure enough, Tessio came forward, believing Michael was too green, too passive, too vulnerable to stop Barzini's takeover. Michael's reaction? Nothing. He didn't lash out. He didn't show suspicion. He didn't even hint that he knew. He let Tessio believe he was clueless, a soft target. He let him arrange the meeting, let him walk right into his own execution. Only at the very end, when the trap was sprung, did Tessio realize the truth. Michael had been ahead of him the entire time. Tell Mike it was just business. I always liked him. Tessio's final words weren't just regret. They were shock. He had miscalculated. Michael played on this illusion, and by the time he saw Michael's true strength, it was too late. Greene was a different kind of opponent. He was the one who stayed out of the family business. He had no criminal record, no street reputation, nothing that made him look dangerous. Even when he killed Solozzo and McCluskey, it was seen as a desperate move, not a strategic one, a reaction to a threat, not the mark of a future Don. And when he was sent to Sicily afterwards, that only reinforced the illusion. To his enemies, Michael was just a fugitive, a hot-headed kid hiding out, not a serious player. Burning. becoming the man who would return and take everything, whether he himself liked it or not. When Michael finally comes back to the States, he doesn't act like a threat or seem like a threat. He doesn't try to overcompensate for the fact that he was an outsider with no experience and now the head of a crumbling empire. He actually had the humility and strategic foresight to use it against them. And if we want to be brutally honest here, there's some truth to it. In the novel, Tom even comments on how you can still tell that Michael basically had a long way to go. Michael knew different enemies required different traps. For Tessio, he played dumb so the betrayal would come naturally. For Greene, he let ego do the work so he wouldn't see the kill shot coming. For Barzini, he blended both, so the moment of realization came only at the final second. Michael didn't just appear weak, he made sure his enemies only saw his strength when it was too late to do anything about it. Imagine you're on the battlefield, facing the Mongols. You've held your ground, fought hard, and now they're running. Their cavalry is scattering, their banners retreating into the dust, the mighty Mongols fleeing. It seems impossible, but you see it with your own eyes. The fearsome warriors who burn cities to the ground are breaking before you. Your heart pounds. This is it, the moment to finish them. You order the charge. Your men roar forward, swords raised, horses thundering across the steppe. The enemy's on the run, completely broken. If you push hard enough, you can run them down, wipe them out entirely. Victory is right there, just a little further. But then, everything changes. The fleeing Mongols suddenly turn. Before you can react, hidden cavalry burst from the hills, archers emerge from behind ridges, and the sky darkens with arrows. You have been lured into a trap. A perfectly orchestrated deception. Your army is surrounded, your men slaughtered, your victory an illusion. This is the feigned retreat, the Mongols' deadliest battlefield trick, and no army in history mastered it better than they did. This is the power of feigning disorder and weakness. The feigned retreat is a deadly battlefield tactic that exploits the natural instincts of an enemy, greed, arrogance, and the rush of victory, only to turn those emotions into their downfall. It begins with a deliberate and controlled withdrawal. A force, often cavalry, engages the enemy, launching attacks that appear reckless or desperate. Then, without warning, they break off and flee. The retreat looks chaotic, soldiers in disarray, banners falling back, formations crumbling. To an eager enemy commander, it's an irresistible sight. The illusion of victory takes hold. Believing the battle's won, the enemy abandons discipline and rushes forward in pursuit, leaving behind their secure formations and defensive positions. But what seems like a collapsing army is actually a well-orchestrated trap. As the pursuing force spreads out in its desperate chase, it loses cohesion. It moves further and further away from its stronghold, deeper into unfamiliar terrain, unaware that it's being led exactly where the retreating army wants it to go. Then, the trap is sprung. At a predetermined moment, the retreating force suddenly turns and fights. Hidden reinforcements emerge from hills, forests, or behind ridges, cutting off escape routes. The pursuers, once in control, are now surrounded, exhausted, and completely vulnerable. Arrows rain down, cavalry crashes into disorganized ranks, and the pursuers, who moments ago believed they were about to secure a glorious victory, are slaughtered. The feigned retreat is not just a test of military discipline, it's a psychological weapon. It weaponizes overconfidence. The best commanders know that the greatest victories come not just from a superior force, but from manipulating the enemy into making fatal mistakes. Why was it so successful? While it plays on human psychology, the enemy believes they have already won and recklessly commits to the pursuit. Their confidence becomes their downfall. It breaks the enemy's formations. A chasing army loses its structure. Soldiers become spread out and disorganized, making them easy targets. It lures enemies into open ground. Instead of fighting on their terms, the enemies get dragged into a battlefield chosen by the feigning army, where ambushes and flanking maneuvers can be executed. It exhausts the enemy. Chasing cavalry and infantry over long distances wears them out. By the time a trap is sprung, they're already too tired to fight back effectively. And the surprise factor, the moment when the retreating army suddenly turns and attacks, creates panic. Armies that believed they were winning now realize they've been tricked. Too late. It also ties into the key stratagem of holding out baits to entice the enemy, feign disorder, and then crush him. A master strategist doesn't always need to display his full strength. In fact, it's often wiser to hide his power, lure in his enemies, and then strike when they least expect it, as Sun Tzu teaches. Hold out baits to entice the enemy, feign disorder, and then crush him. In The Godfather, Michael Corleone executes this principle to perfection. When Tessio betrays him, Michael doesn't react with anger or confrontation. He remains calm, allowing Tessio to think he's too weak and inexperienced to see the betrayal coming. Michael lets Tessio go through with this plan, believing he is in control. But at the last moment, the trap is sprung. Tessio realizes Michael had been ahead of him the entire time. His final words? Greene makes the same mistake. He underestimates Michael, believing he's just a kid playing gangster. When Michael offers to buy him out, Greene laughs in his face, convinced that he holds all the power. Michael doesn't argue. He does not threaten. He simply lets Greene believe his own illusion. And in the end, Greene never sees the bullet coming. History is filled with examples of this strategy. The Mongols mastered the feigned retreat, a tactic that lured overconfident enemies into ambushes. They would deliberately scatter, pretending to be in full retreat, tricking their enemies into pursuing them. Then, at the right moment, they would turn and unleash total destruction. Many armies fell into this trap, mistaking false weakness for true defeat. This principle works because it preys on arrogance and overconfidence. People are naturally drawn to easy victories. If you make yourself seem vulnerable, enemies will underestimate you, drop their guard, and walk into the trap themselves. By the time they realize their mistake, it's too late. A true strategist does not waste energy proving his strength. Instead, he lets his enemies expose themselves, then strikes with precision. The deadliest move is the one they never see coming. It's 1958. After a long day, Michael Corleone heads back to his room, finally believing he can end the night in peace. Kay notices the drapes are open, a small but unusual detail that makes her pause. And then, the compound erupts into chaos. Gunfire slices through the silence, guards shouting as they scramble to secure the estate. Michael moves instinctively, his mind racing, years of war and survival honing his every reaction. The corridors echo with frantic footsteps. But when the dust settles, the assassins are found dead before they can even escape. There's something much deeper going on. Fast forward a few days, far away in Miami. Hyman Roth sat in his modest Miami home, watched a baseball game on television, the flickering light reflecting off his aged, calculating eyes. The rhythm of the sport soothed him, reminding him of simpler times. The voice of the announcer filled the room, describing each play with a steady rhythm. Roth kept his gaze on the television. Outside, the sun glared off the pavement, but inside, the room was cool, shadowed, waiting, just as he had been for years. Roth is awaiting a visit from a very special guest, one that had been living in his mind for a while now. Michael Corleone was on his way. The main concern was the Havana deal, an opportunity unlike any other, a deal worth over $100 million, around $1.1 billion today, promising an empire built on casinos, political influence, and untouchable power. It was the ultimate expansion for the Corleone family, a path towards legitimacy, at least on the surface. A city on the brink of transformation, where business and politics intertwined in ways that only men like Hyman Roth and Michael Corleone could truly appreciate. The benefits were undeniable. With direct partnerships in Cuba, Michael and Roth were creating a new and improved Las Vegas, one where the law enforcement couldn't interfere. The Cuban government itself was backing the venture, investing $50 million, while the Teamsters Union provided the other half. A safe haven for organized crime backed by a government willing to look the other way. Casinos, hotels, and lucrative investments all protected under the watchful eye of Fulgencio Batista's regime. It was a future built on profits and connections, on power that stretched far beyond American borders. In short, an offer Michael could simply not refuse. But it was all a mirage, a masterful deception designed to lull Michael into a false sense of security before striking him down. A trap so intricate that Don Corleone himself, the son, the successor, the so-called genius, was oblivious to it. Roth had been waiting years for this. Roth had spent his life dealing with killers, gangsters, with men who thought they were untouchable. He had first tried to use bullets, striking in a tactically precise way, eliminating those who stood in his path. But Michael Corleone was different. He couldn't be reached with a single bullet or single attack. But this wasn't just any opponent, this was a Corleone. And if there was one thing life had taught Hyman Roth, it was that you don't take on a Corleone head-on. No, that would be a mistake. Ask Don Barzini. By now, Michael wasn't just the most powerful man in the underworld, his reach extended far beyond it, into himself had spent a lifetime cultivating. An outright war against Michael Corleone? Roth was a veteran by now, he knew better. The first strike had been with bullets, tactically precise, calculated, aimed at eliminating Michael Corleone where he was strong, in the sanctuary of his own home. But Michael survived. That failure forced Roth to rethink his approach. Sun Tzu had taught the true path to victory. Avoid what is strong and strike at what is weak. The Lake Tahoe assassination attempt had been calculated, the timing exact, but Michael had survived. That failure forced Roth to rethink his strategy, to move from brute force to subtlety. He believed in patience, in the long game, and like all men who understood revenge, he subscribed to the old Sicilian maxim, revenge is a dish best served cold. So he waited once again. He found the right moment. He still had a much better weapon, a Corleone, not just any Corleone, Michael's own brother. Michael had survived direct confrontation, but Roth didn't need to kill him, not yet. No man, no empire, no dynasty was ever invincible. The key was never in the walls that they built around themselves, but in the cracks within their foundation. And Fredo was that crack. He only needed to weaken him, and so he struck where Michael was vulnerable, at the one place no amount of power or strategy could defend, his own blood. Family was Vito's greatest strength, but Michael's greatest weakness. And Fredo, desperate for validation, aching for recognition, was the perfect opening. Fredo danced on Roth's puppet strings, oblivious to the game he was playing. And Michael had no idea that his own blood was the chisel being used to dismantle his empire. You see, Roth's relationship with Fredo didn't start with this mess. It went back years, back to the Five Families War, back to when Vito Corleone barely survived an assassination attempt and sent Fredo to Vegas to learn the casino business. Fredo was supposed to learn the casino business under Mo Greene, but what he really learned was loyalty to Mo, to Johnny Ola, and to Roth. And to a man like Hyman Roth, a man who played the long game, someone like Fredo was invaluable. Fredo had always been the outsider, overlooked, underestimated. He wanted to be respected, to matter in a world that only saw him as Michael's shadow. That desire made him easy to mold, easy to manipulate. And Roth had been shaping him for years, a man desperate to prove his worth. And men like that, they're easy to mold. So Roth poured into him friendship, opportunity, respect. He made Fredo feel important. He made him feel seen. And now, all that careful work was about to pay off. Michael Corleone had no idea. Not yet, but he would. And when he did, it would already be too late. So why all this hatred towards Michael? Corleone had made it personal. He might have convinced himself that it wasn't, but even a blind man can see the truth. Roth was a master of the game of power and the art of war. He was just on a whole nother level. Far more cunning and duplicitous than a Don Barzini, and much more experienced than the ambitious Virgil Sollozzo. I don't think people understand. We honestly need a whole video just to break down the principles of the art of war Roth utilized, a true masterclass in the game of power. As scorching sun rises over the Syrian desert, casting its relentless heat upon the dust-choked battlefield where two civilizations are about to collide, the Byzantine Empire, the last great superpower of the ancient world, has assembled an army so vast it stretches beyond the horizon. They march forward, armored and confident, believing their sheer numbers will shatter the resistance before them. But beyond the dunes, hidden in the shimmering haze, waits a commander who sees not numbers, but opportunity. Khalid ibn al-Walid, the Sword of God. Unlike his adversaries, who rely on brute force and defensive strongholds, Khalid fought with speed and superior tactics. The Byzantines, believing in their numerical superiority, amassed over 100,000 men, confident they would crush the smaller Muslim force of around 30,000. Yet what they failed to understand was that Khalid was not looking for a battle of strength. He was looking for a battle of weakness. When Khalid assumed command of the Muslim forces at Yarmouk, he quickly assessed the battlefield. The Byzantines held the advantage in manpower, heavy cavalry, and fortified positions. If it was to stand a chance, he would need to avoid as much as possible a traditional head-on confrontation. He orchestrated a strategy that used terrain, deception, and mobility to shift the odds in his favor. The Byzantine commander, General Vahan, believed that brute strength would decide the battle. He assumed that his heavy infantry and superior numbers would crush Khalid's smaller army in a single engagement. But Vahan fought the war he wanted to fight, not the one he was actually in. The battle raged for days. It wasn't looking good for Khalid. Offers of a truce seemed quite appealing to his generals. After all, repelling such an army for this long was an achievement in itself. But Khalid recognized this as growing desperation among the Byzantines. He ordered his center forces, composed of veteran infantry, to feign weakness, gradually pulling back in a controlled retreat. Dust rose in thick clouds as the Byzantines, sensing victory, surged forward, their heavy infantry trampling over fallen comrades in their eagerness to break the Muslim lines. What they didn't realize was that they were advancing deeper into a funnel Khalid had designed. At the same time, Khalid had positioned his most lethal units, his elite mobile cavalry, the Mubarizun, and the swift Bedouin horsemen on the flanks, hidden by the dunes and terrain. These cavalry divisions were a key to the maneuver, and their orders were precise. Wait for the enemy to overextend, then strike with lightning speed. As the Byzantines pushed forward, their vast army began to stretch dangerously thin. Their heavy cavalry, initially positioned on the flanks, had advanced too far in pursuit of what they believed to be a fleeing Muslim force. This left the sides of the Byzantine army exposed, a fatal mistake. Then came Khalid's signal, a high-pitched war cry slicing through the din of battle like the cry of an eagle. At that moment, the wings of the Muslim army erupted into action. On the right flank, Khalid personally led his cavalry in a devastating charge, smashing into the Byzantine left wing with a terrifying force. The light Arab cavalry, unburdened by heavy armor, moved with unparalleled speed, darting between the slower Byzantine horsemen, cutting them down before they could react. Swords flashed in the sunlight, and the Byzantines, caught off guard, fell into disarray. On the left flank, another division of Khalid's cavalry under Ibn Amir mirrored the assault. With spears leveled and war cries piercing the desert air, they tore through the Byzantine right wing, severing it from the main body of the army. The Byzantines, now compressed in the center, began to realize they had been lured into a kill zone. But it was too late. With both wings collapsed, Khalid ordered his center to halt the retreat and launch a full-scale counterattack. The infantry, reinvigorated, surged forward with renewed fury, slamming into the heart of the Byzantine formation. From behind, Khalid's cavalry, having obliterated the enemy flanks, now wheeled around in a crescent formation, cutting off their retreat. The Byzantines were now completely surrounded. Panic set in. The sheer mass of soldiers crammed together created chaos. Horses reared, men trampled one another, and Byzantine officers shouted contradictory orders. Those at the back, realizing the trap, attempted to flee, only to find themselves blocked by steep ravines that bordered the battlefield. Thousands were driven over the cliffs by the relentless onslaught, their screams lost in the roar of the battle. In the center of this maelstrom, General Vahan and his remaining officers desperately tried to rally their troops, but discipline had shattered. The once mighty Byzantine army, the largest force they had assembled in decades, had become a writhing mass of desperation. With no escape, the once mighty army had been decimated. The encirclement tightened like a noose, and Khalid gave the final order: advance and finish it. The Muslim warriors pressed inwards, swords flashing, spears thrusting. Byzantine soldiers, seeing no way out, threw down their weapons and tried to surrender. But in the heat of battle, few were spared. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, over 50,000 Byzantine soldiers lay dead. The once proud army of Emperor Heraclius had been wiped from the battlefield, its survivors scattering into the desert, leaderless and broken. General Vahan barely escaped, his dignity in ruins. The Byzantine dream of holding Syria had collapsed in a single, decisive battle. Khalid ibn al-Walid had executed a perfect double envelopment, a maneuver used by only the greatest generals in history: Hannibal at Cannae, Genghis Khan at the Khalkha River, and Napoleon at Austerlitz. But what's more impressive is that Khalid did it against overwhelming odds. His victory at Yarmouk was not won by brute force, but by strategy. He refused to fight where the enemy was strong, instead striking where they were weak. He didn't allow the Byzantines to dictate the battle. He shaped the battlefield itself. Hence why, even with inferior numbers and even weaponry, he still managed to succeed. Khalid ibn al-Walid, the Sword of God, had fought over 40 battles. He did not lose a single one, making him one of only 3 commanders in history to have never lost a battle. How Rome finally outsmarted Hannibal. Hannibal Barca wasn't just a general, he was a force of nature. The Romans had never faced anyone like him. After Cannae in 216 BCE, where he annihilated an army twice his size, the Republic could have surrendered. Many cities in Italy, terrified and awestruck, did just that, defecting to Hannibal. But Rome refused to break. Instead of suing for peace, they went in the opposite direction. They turned the war into an ideological crusade. It wasn't just about defeating an enemy, it was about ensuring that Rome survived. They made it clear any Roman who considered betraying the Republic would be treated as an enemy. The war was transformed from a military conflict into an existential fight. This hardened Rome's resolve, and it created a brutal, no-compromise war machine. For many years, Rome had relied on its traditional strength, heavy infantry, and head-on battles, and overwhelming numbers. Against any other enemy, this worked. Against Hannibal, it was suicide. He was too fast, too unpredictable, and too brilliant. His army was made up of diverse, specialized warriors, Numidian cavalry, Iberian swordsmen, and Gaulish berserkers. He fought with fluidity, adapting to every battlefield. Rome, on the other hand, was rigid, and that's why they lost, over and over again. Then came Quintus Fabius Maximus, the man who rewrote Rome's war playbook. He realized the truth. Hannibal couldn't be beaten on the battlefield. So Rome stopped fighting him directly. Instead, they waged a war of exhaustion. No more pitched battles, no more letting Hannibal dictate the terms. Instead, they looked at how Hannibal was able to constantly defeat them and actually started to take decisive action. And so, they burned fields ahead of which were what Hannibal relied on to replenish his army, therefore depriving Hannibal of vital resources which would starve his army. They harassed his supply lines, cutting off reinforcements. They refused to engage, frustrating him at every turn. At first, people mocked Fabius. They called him the Cunctator, the delayer, but his strategy was exactly what they needed. Oh, and he was just getting started. You see, Hannibal wanted Rome to fight him. He wanted them to march into another Cannae and be destroyed. But Rome did the opposite. Instead, they knew attacking him directly again meant certain destruction, and so they did something quite brilliant. They went after his allies. Let me take you back a bit. Hannibal had shattered the Italian Confederation once he crossed the Alps. Many cities and regions in northern and southern Italy had defected to his side, especially after Cannae. But Rome knew that not all of these alliances were strong. Many had only switched sides because they were afraid of Carthage's power, not because they wanted to fight Rome. So instead of confronting Hannibal directly, Rome decided to strike at what is weak. They crushed the weaker defectors first, city by city. They picked off the allies who couldn't sustain themselves without Hannibal's direct protection. But if Hannibal was able to come to their aid, they would retreat, much to his frustration. They then starved out defected cities. They isolated them, cutting off trade and supplies. They forced defections. Seeing all this, many allies realized Hannibal's inability to support them. They switched back to Rome. Hannibal couldn't be everywhere at once. His army was powerful, but he lacked the resources to reinforce every city under his control. Rome took advantage of this, systematically eroding his support, shrinking his army further. One by one, his Italian allies either fell or betrayed him. By 207 BCE, Hannibal was still in Italy, but he was alone. By now, Hannibal was trapped in a slow, losing game. Rome had stripped away his allies, denied him reinforcements, and refused to give him another battlefield masterpiece like Cannae. Rome had done to Hannibal what he had once done to them. So they took the next step. They forced Carthage into a war it could not win. While Hannibal was stuck in Italy, Scipio Africanus led a campaign to Spain, attacking Carthage's strongest economic and military base. The Spanish cities fell one by one. In 206 BCE, Scipio captured Carthago Nova, the heart of Carthage's operations in Spain. With Spain gone, Carthage had nothing left. Scipio wasn't finished. He took the fight directly to Africa, threatening Carthage itself. In desperation, the Carthaginian government recalled Hannibal from Italy. Hannibal had spent 16 years in Italy, undefeated in battle. Now, he was being forced to abandon it. At Zama in 202 BCE, Hannibal and Scipio finally met. It was Cannae in reverse. This time, Rome had superior cavalry thanks to their Numidian allies. They used deception. Scipio studied Hannibal's tactics and mirrored them back. They chose the battlefield, forcing Hannibal to fight on Rome's terms. The result? Hannibal was crushed. Rome didn't just win a battle, they ended Carthage as a military power forever. Rome defeated Hannibal by not fighting him head-on, but by 1. Declaring an existential war. They made it a do-or-die struggle. 2. Adapting to a new kind of warfare. They abandoned rigid tactics and played the long game. 3. Attacking the weak first. They stripped away Hannibal's allies, forcing him into isolation. 4. Controlling the battlefield. They forced Carthage into fights it couldn't win. 5. Striking at the enemy's foundation. They destroyed Carthage's ability to wage war. Hannibal was a tactical genius, but Rome was a strategic empire. And that's why Rome won. A master strategist never meets the enemy's strength head-on. Instead, he identifies weaknesses, exploits vulnerabilities, and attacks where the opponent is least prepared. Direct confrontation is a fool's game. The real path to victory lies in outmaneuvering, outlasting, and outthinking the enemy. In The Godfather, Michael Corleone's war against Hyman Roth was not won through brute force. Roth was powerful, well-connected, and had government on his side. A direct attack would have been suicide. Instead, Michael played a long game, isolating Roth, cutting off his allies, and striking when he was most vulnerable. Rather than taking Roth on in Cuba, where he was protected, Michael waited until Roth fled to America, where he had fewer defenses. There, Michael had him eliminated. This is how history's greatest strategists won wars. Hannibal destroyed Roman legions at Cannae by luring them forward and attacking from behind. But Rome adapted. They refused to fight him directly, instead isolating his allies, cutting off his supplies, and forcing him into a war he could not win. Eventually, Rome took the fight to Carthage itself, forcing Hannibal to abandon Italy. They didn't attack where he was strong, they bled him out where he was weak. Khalid ibn al-Walid, the undefeated general of early Islam, used the same strategy at Yarmouk. Outnumbered, he avoided a direct clash with the mighty Byzantine army. Instead, he baited them forward, stretched them thin, and then crushed them from all sides. The Byzantines fell into his trap, just as Fredo fell into Roth's. A true strategist strikes where the enemy is blind, weak, or distracted. He only needs a few decisive moves to wipe out his enemies. He simply hands them the rope to hang themselves. On the day they wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. In The Art of War, Sun Tzu states, "Let your plans be dark and impenetrable as the night, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt." January 1944, London, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the hanging lamps swaying gently above the massive table covered in maps. Around it sat some of the sharpest minds in military deception, British intelligence officers, American strategists, and a handful of men who had spent their lives mastering the art of war. At the head of the table stood General Frederick E. Morgan, the chief architect of the invasion, and the man who would sell the greatest lie of the war. He tapped the map with a gloved finger. "If we're able to land in Normandy, gentlemen, then we must convince the Germans it will be anywhere but there." A murmur spread through the room. The German high command, particularly Hitler, was obsessed with the Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point between England and France. If they could be led to believe the main invasion was coming there, then Normandy would be left undermanned and vulnerable. Morgan let the moment settle before he continued. "Operation Fortitude must be airtight. We must make the Germans see ghosts, hear whispers, and prepare for an attack that will never come. Every piece of evidence must lead them to Calais." The Ghost Army, the 1st U.S. Army Group. General George S. Patton was one of the most feared and respected commanders of the war. The Germans considered him the Allies' best field general, which made him the perfect bait. A fake army, the 1st U.S. Army Group, was created under his command. But deception on this scale required more than just names on paper. The Allies built an entire illusion. Inflatable tanks and vehicles. Along the coast of southeastern England, massive air-filled tanks and wooden artillery pieces were placed in open fields, appearing real to enemy reconnaissance. Fake airfields and landing craft. Wooden planes and fake landing craft were positioned along the coast, suggesting an impending invasion at Calais. Phantom radio traffic. Entire networks of radio operators sent scripted, meaningless chatter mimicking the movements of a real army. German intelligence, constantly listening, would pick up the transmissions and assume an invasion force was amassing. Controlled leaks. Double agents, including the infamous Juan Pujol Garcia, Garbo, fed misinformation to the Germans, carefully planting hints that Calais was the target. Everything had to be believable. If the Germans doubted even a fraction of it, the real invasion would be at risk. The double agents, turning the game around. Perhaps the most brilliant aspect of Fortitude was the use of double agents, spies who had been turned by British intelligence. Garbo, Juan Pujol Garcia, a Spanish spy who had convinced the Germans he was their best asset, yet he was feeding them lies crafted by British intelligence. Brutus, Roman Charanovsky, a former Polish officer who the Germans believed was loyal, but who was really playing a double game. These agents carefully dripped out information, never too much at once, never too obvious. The goal was not to make the Germans suspicious, but to let them reach their own conclusions. Every fake division, every false communication, every misleading detail had to feel earned. The final move, D-Day and the success of the lie. For 7 weeks, German reinforcements remained in the north, waiting for an attack that would never come. By the time they realized the truth, the Allies had already secured a foothold in France. Operation Fortitude had worked. The greatest illusion in military history had fooled the Third Reich, turning deception into victory. But even after the war, many German officers would look back wondering how they had been so thoroughly deceived, how an army of ghosts had led them to defeat. I don't know about you, but the footage of the inflatable tanks is hysterical, especially considering the impact they had. Without them, we might all be talking German today. A true strategist never lets the enemy see the truth. You need to infiltrate your enemy's mind, then use misdirection, illusion, and diversion. These are the tools of victory. The battle is won before the first strike, not by brute force, but by shaping reality itself. Michael Corleone understood this deeply. On the day of his father's funeral, while others mourned, Michael was watching. At dawn on May 10, 1940, the sky above Western Europe was filled with the deafening roar of German bombers. The invasion had begun. The world watched in disbelief as Germany launched an all-out assault on France and the Low Countries. But this was no ordinary invasion. This was war reimagined. The French believed they were prepared. Their Maginot Line, an impenetrable fortress along the German border, stood as a monument to their faith in defensive warfare. Their generals, many of them veterans of the First World War, expected another slow, grinding conflict with months of trench building and artillery exchanges. They anticipated an enemy advance similar to 1914, a direct push through Belgium. But they all were dead wrong. Instead, they were met with a storm of speed, precision, and shock. The German panzers surged forwards, their treads grinding against the dirt as they tore through the Ardennes forest, a place the French High Command had deemed impassable for tanks. The Luftwaffe, like a flock of mechanical vultures, screamed through the skies, raining fire on French convoys, rail lines, and fortifications. The sheer intensity of this assault was unlike anything they had seen before. Panic spread like wildfire. French outposts were silent within hours, their communications cut, their commanders unable to coordinate a response. Their carefully laid French defenses crumbled not from brute force, but from paralysis, from fear, from the sheer speed at which the battlefield was shifting. But how did this happen so fast? How could one of the strongest armies in the world collapse in a matter of weeks without a single decisive battle? The answer lay in the very design of a new, innovative operational doctrine, one that emphasized speed, coordination, and decisive action to achieve rapid victories. Blitzkrieg. With columns of armored vehicles racing ahead, infantry barely able to keep up, and the Luftwaffe hammering at any attempt at regrouping, France was being outmaneuvered before they even understood the nature of the attack. There was no grand, decisive confrontation, no heroic last stand, no prolonged trench warfare. France was conquered before it could truly fight. By June 14th, the once mighty French army crumbled, and German troops marched into Paris, not as exhausted victors, but as conquerors who had barely broken their stride. By June 22nd, France surrendered. It was an unthinkable defeat. A nation that had withstood 4 years of brutal trench warfare in World War I had fallen in mere weeks without a major battle? The world had just witnessed the terrifying effectiveness of Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, a doctrine that rewrote the rules of modern warfare. But why was it so effective? You see, it's deeper than just tanks rolling through France. This wasn't just about firepower, it was about strategy, deception, and psychological warfare. So what does Blitzkrieg actually mean, and why was it so successful? The answer lies in understanding how Germany didn't just attack France's army, they attacked their very ability to resist. The origins of Blitzkrieg, learning from failure. To understand why Blitzkrieg worked, we have to look at what came before it. Blitzkrieg wasn't created out of thin air. It was born from failure. After World War I, Germany had been humiliated. Millions had died in brutal trench warfare, and the war had ended in a stalemate. But the German military knew one thing: never fight a war of attrition again. So they studied, they adapted, they asked, how do you win before the enemy even has a chance to resist? This is where Heinz Guderian, one of Germany's sharpest military minds, enters the picture. He saw the potential of tanks, panzer divisions for rapid breakthroughs, motorized infantry to maintain momentum. Air power, the Luftwaffe, to soften enemy defenses and create chaos. But Germany wasn't the only nation with tanks and aircraft, so why did Blitzkrieg succeed where others failed? Because it wasn't about fighting battles, it was about preventing them altogether. The French mistake, fighting the last war. The French thought they were ready. They had the Maginot Line, a fortress stretching along the German border. They had more tanks than Germany. They had manpower. But here's the problem. They prepared for the last war, not the next one. They expected a static war, fought in trenches with slow advances and grinding battles. But Germany had no intention of repeating World War I. Instead, they devised a new kind of warfare, embodied in Fall Gelb, Case Yellow. 1. Lure French and British forces into Belgium, making them think the main German attack was there. 2. Strike through the Ardennes forest, a region the French mistakenly thought it was impossible for tanks to cross. 3. Break through at Sedan, cutting off Allied forces in the north and forcing them into a desperate retreat. By the time France understood what was happening, German panzers were already deep inside their territory. There was no prolonged battle. There was no trench warfare. There was no time to react. France was defeated before they could fight. At this point, it wasn't just about speed. It was about complete battlefield control. And control begins by attacking strategy itself. How Blitzkrieg actually works. Blitzkrieg was not just about speed. It was about control. It was about manipulating the battlefield before the enemy could resist. But how exactly did it work? What made Blitzkrieg different from previous military strategies? The 4 stages of Blitzkrieg. 1. Aerial bombardment and psychological shock. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, struck first, smashing enemy airfields, communications, and railways. Bombers hit cities, roads, and infrastructure, creating chaos and panic before ground troops even arrived. The goal wasn't just to destroy defenses, it was to shatter morale before the real battle even began. 2. Rapid armored assault, Schwerpunkt, focal point. The panzer divisions broke through at a single weak point in enemy lines instead of engaging the entire front. Tanks advanced at maximum speed, sometimes covering 50 miles in a day. The key? Never stop moving. What happens when an army moves so fast that the enemy can't even organize a counterattack? 3. Encirclement and isolation, Kesselschlacht, cauldron battle. Instead of destroying enemy armies head-on, Blitzkrieg forces trapped them in pockets, cutting off supplies and reinforcements. The surrounded enemy was then forced to surrender or be annihilated. This wasn't just about winning battles. It was about dismantling the enemy's ability to fight at all. 4. Exploitation and consolidation. Blitzkrieg never allowed the enemy to regroup. The attack kept moving, forcing the enemy into constant retreat. The goal wasn't just to win, it was to demoralize and overwhelm. By the time the French could ever respond, the war was over. The climax and resolution. By the time French High Command understood what was happening, it was too late. The Luftwaffe ruled the skies, preventing French reinforcements from moving. German panzers moved faster than French commanders could respond, breaking through defenses before counterattacks could be organized. The British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, was trapped at Dunkirk, forcing a desperate evacuation. On June 14, 1940, German troops entered Paris without resistance. A week later, France surrendered. Blitzkrieg had subdued the enemy without fighting a prolonged war. Blitzkrieg is a textbook example of Sun Tzu's principle. Ultimate exercise lies not in winning every battle, but in defeating the enemy without ever fighting. The highest form of warfare is to attack strategy itself. Instead of grinding out a war, Germany dictated the pace, forced their opponents to react, and broke their resistance before battle could even begin. Blitzkrieg teaches us that the greatest victories come not from strength alone, but from dictating the battle itself, subduing the enemy before the fight even begins. A true strategist moves unseen, plans in the shadows, and when the time comes, strikes with overwhelming force. The battle isn't won when the enemy falls. It's won long before, in the silence, in the waiting, in the careful setup of a trap that only springs when escape is impossible. Michael Corleone's enemies thought he was weak. They saw him as the grieving son, the reluctant leader, still learning the game. But Michael played them all. While they believed they were controlling him, he was the one setting the board. Tessio thought he was leading Michael into an ambush. Barzini thought Michael had no choice but to fall in line. Greene laughed in his face. They never saw it coming. At the baptism, as Michael stood before the altar, his enemies were already as good as dead. He had arranged every execution in advance, timed it to perfection. While he spoke words of faith, his men carried out his orders with ruthless precision. One moment they believed they were in control. The next, they were gone. When Michael finally emerged from the church, the war was already over. This is the essence of Blitzkrieg, the strategy Germany used to conquer France in weeks, not years. The French had built the Maginot Line, an impenetrable defense against an invasion they expected. But Germany didn't attack where they were prepared. Instead, they moved through the Ardennes forest, a place the French thought tanks could never pass. The attack came like lightning, unexpected, unstoppable, crushing resistance before it could even form. This is the power of speed, surprise, and total commitment. The enemy mustn't have time to adjust, to react, or to understand what's happening. By the time they realize they're at war, they have already lost. A wise leader does not warn his enemies. He moves in silence, waits for the moment, then unleashes destruction in an instant. By the time they see the storm, it's already upon them. This only works with the right foundation. These principles are connected. Therefore, neglecting one can cause you to build on a weak foundation, risking the plan, and even worse, it could backfire. But do it properly, and victory will always be yours.
Only don't tell me you're innocent, because it insults my intelligence.
So, now you know the art of war. But knowledge alone isn't enough. It's how you apply it that matters. On the Culture Mafia channel, we dissect the art of war like never before. From the Godfather to Napoleon, Hannibal to Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great to World War II. You'll see how history's greatest minds turned Sun Tzu's principles into power, outmaneuvering their enemies and shaping the world. Don't just read the art of war. See it in action. Learn how you can win the game, and be so far ahead of your competition you won't even be playing the same game. Think you've understood the art of war? Take this quiz and put your strategic thinking to the test. Discover your strengths, expose your blind spots, and see how you measure up as a tactician. Let's see where you rank.